Hello and welcome to The Absolute Truth with Emerald Robinson. I'm Eduardo Norret in for Emerald. So Donald Trump dominated last night's Super Tuesday elections across the country. He won every single contest except for Vermont. Nikki Haley won that state before she dropped out of the race today. So based off how these primaries have gone, Trump's dominance isn't really a surprise. But if you put it into the context of the last 4 years, what he has done since leaving office, it's somewhat remarkable. Whatever you think of him, Trump is close to pulling off the greatest comeback in American political history. Laura Ingraham made that point last night on Fox News. Here it is.
I think a lot of the Haley voters are protest voters. They're never going to vote for Trump, and I don't think she has a lot of sway over them, so I'm not sure what her bargaining chip is. I think tonight we should look back at the people who proclaimed Donald Trump's political death. Donald Trump is finally finished, New York Times, November 2020. Relax, a Trump comeback in 2024 is never going to happen, Politico. This could be the greatest political comeback story of all time. I mean, maybe some of you can remember something better than this, but if he pulls this off in November, and it's an if, but even to get to this moment, pretty much everyone was declaring him DOA. What does that say about all of us? I mean, maybe we need to spend more time with the American people, or at least I do, because I had my doubts at various times as well.
So if it's one thing Americans shouldn't do at this point, it's doubt the political ability of Donald Trump. He's proven that. Even Nikki Haley, who for so long was deluded by her own chances at winning the White House, she finally dropped out of the race this morning. Here's part of her speech.
In all likelihood, Donald Trump will be the Republican nominee when our party convention meets in July. I congratulate him and wish him well. I wish anyone well who would be America's president. Our country is too precious to let our differences divide us. I have always been a conservative Republican and always supported the Republican nominee. But on this question, as she did on so many others, Margaret Thatcher provided some good advice when she said, quote, "Never just follow the crowd. Always make up your own mind." It is now up to Donald Trump to earn the votes of those in our party and beyond it who did not support him. And I hope he does that.
So again, as we told you, Haley chose to drop out after was being routed in every single contest this primary cycle, including her home state of South Carolina. She only managed to win in Vermont, Bernie Sanders' stomping grounds, and of course in Washington, D.C., where Republicans aren't really Republicans. They might as well be Democrats. At best, you could say they're moderates. But anyway, the point is, it's gotten so obvious that Trump is shifting the political landscape. Even CNN, which hates Donald Trump, was compelled to admit it last night. Take a listen.
And so the weaknesses come in the sense of, in very much the way you're talking about how he is reforming the Republican Party. Right. More working class people, including voters of color, right. African American, men primarily, but also Latinos. And also the Democrats picking up more educated voters. Right. There's also, so you talked about the education divide, also a big gender divide. Yep. Men voting Republican, women voting Democrat.
So Trump is making inroads among once solid Democrat voters like blue-collar workers, the middle class, and even the black vote. Trump himself talked about his path forward personally, but also for the country last night in his victory speech. Here it is.
We're going to straighten it out. We're going to close our borders. We're going to drill, baby, drill. We're going to get the inflation down. And we are going to make our country greater than ever before. And we're going to do it quickly. We're going to do it quickly. It's going to go fast. We have to get the criminals out. We have many, many criminals that have entered our country. We have people coming in from such bad places, and we're going to have to get them out. We have murderers that are being deposited into our country. We have drug dealers at the biggest and highest levels that are coming into our country. We have people coming into our country that just shouldn't be here, but many, and I say many, large percentages, they come in through the caravans, they come in many different ways. Now we find out again, they come in through airplanes, we'll send them in. This is crazy. But they come into our country, we're going to stop them. We're going to close our borders. We're going to have to deport a lot of people, a lot of bad people, because our countries can't live like this. Our cities are choking to death. Our states are dying. And frankly, our country is dying. And we're going to make America great again, greater than ever before.
Of course, he's right. Our country is dying. So joining me now to react to all of this is my old friend Will Witt. He's a national best-selling author of Do Not Comply, Taking Power Back from America's Corrupt Elite, which is what Trump is doing. Will, thanks for joining us.
Hey, man, good to see you again.
Good to see you. So react to Trump's Super Tuesday victory for me. As I said there, look, it's not that this is a surprise. I mean, basically for the entire primary cycle, he has led. But I think, again, in the bigger context of the last 4 years, it's a remarkable comeback. I mean, if he's able to pull this off and win the White House back in November, I mean, I don't think we've ever seen this in American political history.
Yeah, I think the thing that people need to realize a lot of the time is, and we're looking at Joe Biden as a president, right? Joe Biden is not in charge. He's a decrepit old man, essentially, and there are people behind him who are pulling the strings and making all these things happen, right? And so the real menace that I think we as conservatives are facing right now in America is not Joe Biden. It is the deep state, and it is also just leftist principles in general, where you go to a college campus like I've done and interviewed thousands of students, and I did that all throughout 2020, 2021. And I asked them about Joe Biden. They have no love or support for Joe Biden himself. They agree with me that he's a decrepit old man, but they love the leftist principles. They love the transgenderism stuff, the Black Lives Matter, the climate change, the whatever, all these nonsensical things. They love these ideas. And so what I think it really comes down to right now with conservatives is that maybe we need to move a little bit away from, I guess, political processes and start focusing on these ideas. Trump should be focusing on these ideas as he's moving forward and trying to take them down to actually shift people away from this leftist paradigm. Because right now, these people just see Trump as an evil, horrible person and Joe Biden as just the next best alternative, even though they don't really like him so much. It's about changing the culture around these ideas and these people to actually, I think, get anything done.
Well, I think it's interesting you say the ideas, and I want to ask you about that in a minute, but I think that's part of the reason why Trump is reportedly polling better with 18 to 35-year-olds and even Gen Z. And I think part of it is, look, you can't find a Gen Zer who says they're going to vote for Trump who could tell you about all his policies or who could talk to you about tax policy and foreign policy. I mean, maybe a few of them, but I think for most of those young people who are saying, yeah, I would vote for Trump, it is about the culture. It's about sort of the feeling they have for the country and their feeling of where the country is moving. Obviously, you and I are more or less the same age. We both used to go out on the street and talk to these young people. So what do you think that is? Again, a generation that used to vote very left, very far left, and now you're seeing a large segment of it say they've had enough and they're actually open to voting for Trump.
Yeah, well, I'm not exactly sure about this polling, but I know that in a lot of polling with younger voters, you're finding that young men are definitely going conservative. And why wouldn't they? What is the leftist utopia, urban city, answer emails all day type of life given these people? Has it given them any sort of purpose in their lives? And do they feel like they're on some sort of adventure, some quest, doing something admirable or courageous with themselves? Of course not. They're getting nothing from the lives that they've been told are great by these leftist principles. And so they are rejecting that. They're trying to find some sort of meaning and purpose. But unfortunately, it seems like young women are going the opposite way, and that young women are leaving that sort of, I guess you could say, more conservative, traditional, purpose-filled life and saying, okay, we want to be just like men. We want to work the same as men. And then it really comes down to the abortion issue as well, which is turning lots of young women to the left. So I think there is definite inroads for conservatives with young people, but I think it's going to be a lot harder to break into the women when it comes to actually making them conservative voters, and not just the men, because the men have been completely shafted and they're starting to realize it. How do we do that same thing for women? It's definitely not Nikki Haley as a, just because she's a woman, but it takes actual people who can speak to women on the issues and show them things that really matter in this country.
Well, since you mentioned the women issue, and I try to always relate this to people in my life. So to me, the message works if it works within your own demographic. In other words, we can talk about what the rhetoric is on X from the pro-life movement or from the ultra-conservative, a crowd who is very pro-life, and rightfully so. But that message doesn't necessarily translate with women in our everyday lives, women who are our age, who are maybe potentially younger. And so I always think of how could I frame this so that a girl that I know, maybe a friend, my friend's girlfriend, someone like that, how could I phrase it so that they're convinced of the issue, or so that they don't buy into the left's rhetoric about us, which is that we want to take away a woman's right to choose, we're going to turn them into the Handmaid's Tale, that whole thing. So in your life, what do you think the appropriate rhetoric and message should be on the issue of abortion to younger voters ahead of 2024? Because like it or not, this is going to be a huge issue, and it could be one that decides the election in certain states.
Yeah, well, the number one thing you have to do is have compassion. I mean, you're going and talking to someone who has no idea about these things or thinks that, aborting a baby at 9 months is completely fine. These people are completely misguided and have been sold a lie by these leftists. And so I think it really comes down to asking questions with compassion. One of the top strategies that I would do when I was changing minds on abortion is I would start with 9 months and say, hey, do you know what a baby looks like after it's been in the womb for 9 months? And they say, oh, I don't know. And then you explain it. And then they say, well, what about 6 months? Then you explain it. Oh, well, do you know what it looks like at 3 months? Explain it. What about after, heartbeat, after 21 days, whatever. And you go down the line of explaining what the child actually looks like in the womb at all these stages. And these people have no idea. They don't actually understand what abortion is. So I think you can do that. But then on the other hand, when we're talking about this, it makes it very difficult because it's like, okay, we want to have all these women come over to be conservatives, and maybe we don't push, unequivocally pro-life in their faces so that they don't get all scared and back off and think that we're, again,
Right.
handmaids tailing them or whatever. But do you want to have this big tent type of conservatism or this big tent type of culture? Or do you want to have the truth that you stand firmly in and then say, okay, if you're with it, you're with it. If you're not, you're not. And there's nothing really you can do about it. That's kind of the stance that I've taken, that I am unequivocally pro-life, and that if you don't like it, I'm sorry, I'll do my best to communicate these things to you in a way that you will understand, but I'm not going to water down my message because it might scare people or hurt people
No,
or
for sure.
offend
It's not a
people.
question of watering down the message, but I think to me, if you want to have a say at this talk, you have to have power first. In other words, if we run on a message that, for better or worse, whether it's the right message or the wrong message, and we end up losing the election, then you can forget everything we believe in. I mean, we don't have a seat at the table, we don't have power, and so I think sometimes a lot of people on our side, not you, not me, but let's say, I guess, the politicos, the people who are running the Republican Party, they forget that more than anything, you have to have power first. And maybe once you have power, once you control Congress, once you have someone in the White House, then you can sort of frame things a different way, because otherwise you're going to be excluded from this talk. And so actually on that point, on the issue of having power, but also getting behind the ideas, like you mentioned at the top, I've known you for a while, and I've noticed lately you've kind of gotten away from politics. You don't talk about it in the same way that maybe your average cable news show would, or in such a reactionary way. I mean, I think you take the issues of the day, you take the stories that are in the news, and you broaden it and expand it to ask yourself and ask your audience, what does this mean in your life? What does this mean for the future of the country? Not tomorrow or not in the next election, but in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, when you're going to have kids, when the next generation is going to be out there. So why this shift, and when did it happen for you, and how do you feel it's helped you look at maybe the political landscape a little differently?
Well, I think that when you look at the political landscape and you see how many liars there are out there, how many people are just doing it for money, for fame, for power, usually that's power over other people, not power over themselves to become a better person, you find that none of these people really act with integrity. And myself, being someone who's been in this industry for a long time, I haven't always acted with integrity, that's for sure. And so then when I see other people doing it and I see the political media landscape we have, I say, man, like, this is what are we even fighting for? We're fighting for the right for conservatives to whine on social media about things, so that they can get famous and make videos that go viral. That's not why I want to say the things that I say. Going into some of the stuff that I'm talking about now, some of the most important things is the health things, right? The World Health Organization predicts that 50% of people are going to get cancer in their lives. Heart disease is the #1 killer of people in America. The vast majority, or not a vast majority, but a majority of people in America are now obese, are now overweight. So tell me, how are people supposed to fight against tyranny if they're overweight? How are they supposed to fight against their government if they have cancer? How are they supposed to have a mind that thinks critically about things if they are putting toxic things into their body that make them lethargic and lazy? Or putting vaccines, any of this kind of stuff? How are they supposed to fight back against the power? They can't. And so when we're talking about the health stuff and the way of making yourself a warrior for God and for truth and for integrity, that is an all-encompassing thing that I have found in many aspects doesn't even revolve around like party politics all that much. It's about fighting for the things that are true, good, and beautiful, right? If you can fight for those things and really mean it, even if it's just in a small circle, you can do so much good than just worrying about the political issues of the day, because so many of the people who are presenting them to you are just doing it for their own benefit.
Well, I think that's such a deep point, because I think the state of our politics and our media, it drives so much anger. It leaves Americans so angry, so divided. And so I think at a certain point you have to step back and ask yourself, aside from voting, aside from maybe donating my time to volunteer and stuff like that, how much change do I personally have? And so, like you said, you can make the choice between, okay, am I going to stay angry? Am I going to let the politics of the day make me bitter and angry, or am I going to tune it out, turn it off? Understand that, there's only so much I can do, and perhaps maybe better my own life, exercise, eat healthy, develop close relationships. And so as you've been on this path that I think maybe a lot of young Americans have found meaning in, especially post-COVID, when many of these Americans were locked down and isolated, what are some of the things you've learned personally, whether it's health related, whether it's just about how you manage your daily life? I know this is sort of like personal life guru stuff, but I think it's helpful because, again, there's only so much cable news you can watch. There's only so much, X you can scroll on in social media. I mean, at the end of the day, it's the same stuff every single day, every single week. And so there's got to be a deeper meaning to what we're doing here.
Yeah, well, one of the things that people always do, you go on any of these shows or go on social media, and they're always asking, when will Joe Biden change? When will the Republicans change? When will the country change? When will this community change? All these different things, yada, yada. When will they change? But people are never looking at themselves in the mirror and saying, when will I change? When will I be the person to make a change? Imagine if we had all the people who are conservative in this country, who are Christians in this country, are health focused in this country, and said, when will I change? Think about the amount of good that you could do if you had this conglomerate of people actually looking to themselves to be the best people that they can. But instead, we're always blaming someone else. That's a very Republican conservative thing too. We always talk about the offended liberals, the snowflakes, but conservatives do the same thing too by putting blame on someone else. Sure, there are people who are to blame. Sure, there's lots of things that are people's fault, and you should know about these things and be informed on all of it. But to think that you don't have any part to play in it and you're just waiting on other people to change it for you is ludicrous. We should all be working to better ourselves. I mean, I would say the number one thing I've gotten on is so much about breaking away from the urban cities. I can't tell you how much happier I am living in this little rural town in Florida, outside of any big city, after living in Los Angeles and then Denver before that, and just being where there's no one really around except a lot of really good people. There's sunshine every day here. I have my own fruit orchard and garden, and I have the dogs. I mean, it's just an amazing thing to be away from the hustle and bustle of the city, and you feel a lot closer to God in that way as well, and the people you love. So I would say, just if you can, this obviously isn't feasible for everyone, but take the first step and try to get away from the urban cities. You'll be a lot happier. I know you did that too. So,
I got out of New York City, couldn't be happier.
Yeah.
And like you say, look, not everyone can go move to a rural area, but I think we can all find in our own lives some peace and quiet, some nature. That's good for everyone. On that note, on what you've been doing, you having moved to Florida and finding a different pace of life, but also sort of a different element, next phase of your career. Most people know you for the Man on the Street videos you did for PragerU, then of course the 2 best-selling books, your last one, Do Not Comply. What's next for you? Are you working on another book? And tell people about the type of content you're creating now versus what you did before, and what you have planned for the next couple of years.
Yeah, right now I'm working on another book, so I'm not exactly sure what the topic is exactly. I know that I kind of almost want to do a sequel to Do Not Comply, about do not complying with all of the health and the vaccines and this kind of stuff. So we'll see if that can get published, but we'll try our best on that. And then I'm just making video content like I used to, and then trying to start a farm, actually. My dream right now with my soon-to-be wife, hopefully, is to start a dairy farm. That's what we're working on right now, and trying to find land and work it all out and do agritourism and all of that, to start kind of like a new community of people who all come together. And I sound like a damn hippie from the 1970s saying
well,
this stuff,
it has sort of flipped. I mean,
yeah.
I sort of mocked, I remember 10 years ago, maybe when I was in school still, I mocked these sort of environmental science people who were out there protesting GMO foods and all this stuff like that. I thought, these people are lunatics. These all what do you need organic stuff for? But now I find myself very much on that trend, and strictly so. Like, no, non-organic is so bad for you. The pesticides, all this stuff. I saw you were on the raw milk kick, which I've tried recently too, and is good. So I mean, I think, and if you could talk a little bit about that, it is sort of weird how things have flipped, and how the left, even the ones on the younger side, are now more corporatist. They side with corporations. They side with the establishment, when for decades liberals were seen as anti-establishment, and that's sort of more what the right has become.
Yeah, well, look, the left, one of the things that's very important about the left is that the left doesn't care about hypocrisy. We always say we need to call it their hypocrisy, yada, yada, yada. But the left cares about power. That's what means more to them than anything. And then they wield that power to be able to shape minds, I guess you could say. And so right now the left is in complete power. They've been in power for a very long time in this country. And so because of that, they are able to push messages of victimization and minority causes to the masses at a great scale. Instead of someone looking to Christ as their savior, the left comes in with the power that they have and the multimedia corporations and all this stuff and comes and says, no, Jesus is not the savior, or, you know, yourself, even helping yourself, that's not the savior. It is this new religion of leftism is a savior. And so people come in and turn themselves into a savior instead of looking for a higher power that gives them meaning in their lives. And if you make people feel like they are being victimized and they are the savior of their own lives and also other people, it's a very narcissistic complex. Well, then these people are going to feel like this is their life goal, this is their life purpose, their meaning, and not look to anything else like that. Whereas I think from a more conservative standpoint, where you're looking for some sort of meaning in your life, looking some power that is outside of yourself, a lot of that comes from the health stuff, especially if you're trying to build up a healthy family and things like that. You find that, wow, I care about my family. I care about being self-sustainable. I hate the government. I want to do things that are away from them. How can I do that? And it really comes down to a lot of this health stuff.
I couldn't agree more. Will Witt, thanks so much for joining us, man. Really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you, man.
All right, coming up, MSNBC mocking Trump supporters for caring about immigration. They act like it's not an important issue facing the country. Chadwick Moore on that next.
I mean, if you look at some of these exit polls, I mean, I live in Virginia. Immigration was the #1 issue.
Yes.
I mean, again, these could change in Virginia.
Well, Virginia does have a border with West Virginia. Very contested area.
Build the wall. Like, what?
So that was Biden's former flack doing her best Valley Girl routine while mocking the legitimate concerns of millions of Americans, immigration. Like, everything's totally fine. Don't care about the fact that millions of illegals have come into the country. Millions of military-age males from Latin America, Africa, and China have poured across our borders. No big deal. You're stupid for caring about it. But that wasn't all that MSNBC did last night. After insulting most Americans during an election year, a large majority of them, the divas of MSNBC kept pressing on with their war on truth and reality. Joy Reid leading among them. She tried to claim Trump's presidency was a complete failure because of how he handled the COVID-19 pandemic. Here she was.
Donald Trump had one job. He had one crisis. He's saying, oh, all of these things were perfect. You had one crisis, bruh. It was called the pandemic. And you know what you did? You bollocksed it completely. You did so poorly at managing your sole crisis.
Of course, that's obviously not true. Trump respected the freedom of millions of Americans, kept the country open as long as he could, and he fared much better than other countries in Europe and around the world. I guess Joy Reid probably would have preferred to live in lockdown China. So joining me now to react to all of this, the Harpies on MSNBC, is Chadwick Moore. He's a contributor to The Spectator and author of the best-selling book, Tucker. Chadwick, thanks for joining us.
Hey, great to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. So, you know, this isn't anything new sort of that we've seen from MSNBC, but what's striking to me is instead of realizing that almost every single poll shows Americans having immigration as their #1 issue, instead of admitting that if you're on the left and saying, you know, this is a real issue, Biden needs to do something about this, and maybe using the opportunity last night to call on the political class who may be watching that show to do something, they sort of just dismiss it out of hand. They're going to ride this wave all the way to November and I guess just hope that immigration kind of fades as a top issue?
Yeah, pretty bad optics. Look at these smug, cackling Nepo babies over at MSNBC who've had everything handed to them, laughing at the legitimate concerns of immigration. It's not their schools that are closing because immigrants are being shuffled into the bedrooms like happened, or shuffled into the gyms to use as beds like happened here in New York. You know, they make a snide joke about, well, I guess they share a border with West Virginia. What's in West Virginia? Oh, those filthy, dirty rednecks. We can't have more of those, but bring in more people from the third world to take over our cities and our country, and hopefully we'll get new voters. I mean, these people are so disgusting. They can't admit this is a problem. And of course, they don't see it. They see millions of immigrants pouring over the border, and they just think, oh, look, new housekeepers, new gardeners, new slaves, because that's the only interaction they have with these people. It doesn't affect them one bit. So, you know, what do we expect from them? It's just amazing they really haven't learned anything. It's that same that we saw back in 2016, that smug, poo-pooey, look down your nose at the concerns of real Americans, of working Americans, of people who don't live on the Upper East Side or in Ivory Towers in Manhattan. And you know, keep trying to shame them, pretend like their concerns aren't legitimate because they're so embarrassed by what Joe Biden has done. They're so embarrassed by the state of this country.
And, it's interesting. Stephen Miller, reacting to that clip last night on X, posted about the fact that, as an example, Virginia, the state they were talking about, now 1 in 4 Virginians was born in another country. English as a second language classes, or what they call English language learners, have skyrocketed in Virginia schools. You mentioned the schools. Talk about crowded emergency rooms, because illegal immigrants tend to use emergency rooms for their basic medical care. And so they totally dismiss that out of hand. I would guess you, living in New York City, have seen some of this, have seen some of the effects of the migrant crisis with what Abbott and DeSantis and other red state governors have done to the city. And so I'm wondering if in your circle, if around the people you live, if they take the Joy Reid view and continue to deny that this is a real problem, or are you actually seeing maybe some blue-leaning New Yorkers? I'm not going to say that they're going to vote for Trump or anything, but do you see them acknowledging that this is a real problem?
Well, yeah, I mean, it is wild here in New York, the migrants. You see them everywhere, and you recognize them right off the bat. And it's obviously not a racial thing, because New York is a majority minority city, but there's like a look. There's like, you can tell that they're out of place. They don't belong here. They're new to this country. They just look and behave differently, and you see them everywhere. And just meander around the streets at all hours of the night. So people certainly notice this stuff. Of course, what happened like here in New York, funny enough, when they were closing down schools to house migrants, they were doing it in only Republican districts, of which there's about 5 in New York City. There's 5 Republican city council districts out of about 50 districts. And they were only sending them to these Republican districts that voted for Trump, which is very interesting. So it wasn't, again, touching the rich white liberals who voted for this. And yet there is still, I think, I try not to have much to do with liberals these days because they're so insufferable. But there is you can tell that they're a little freaked out by this. They don't like this, but they can't say anything. And they'll never vote for Trump, obviously, or any Republican, but they might just stay home. But one thing you're seeing is that they're not really defending this, and they're not being as vocal about it. You don't really see people marching around with signs saying no human is illegal, like you did during the Trump administration. Those protests aren't happening. Instead, they're protesting, for Gaza or whatever. So there's a kind of silent shame, but it doesn't mean that they're going to start voting for Trump. But it may mean that they simply stay home because Biden's not very popular with anyone.
Well, I'm sorry for you because you live there, but I have to say I hope this continues. I mean, I hope Abbott and DeSantis continue to flood these cities with migrants until they're at a complete breaking point. I mean, it's the only way. I lived in New York up until last year, and by the time I had left the Roosevelt Hotel, I believe it was called, which is sort of Midtown East area, they had started accepting migrants. I mean, they've taken over the hotels completely, and like you say, it's not necessarily to say anything about these people. If I were them, I would do the same thing. I mean, our country is dumb enough to let these people come in here. We offer them free housing, free food. Now Mayor Adams offering them free credit cards and stuff. So it's not hard to understand why they're doing this, but it's shocking that the city has responded in this way. In a similar way, because you touched upon this with all the craziness of the left in New York, AOC the other day, she was harassed by some of her own supporters, I think, on the far left. Let's play the clip.
You refuse to call it a genocide.
I need you to understand.
It's not okay that there's a genocide happening. You're not actively against it.
You're lying.
I'm lying?
You're not.
You went on TV and avoided talking about it.
You can't call it a genocide. How do you say that? We're not lying.
We're not lying.
You've been sending me interviews. It's insane.
And you're going to cut this and you're going to clip this so that it's completely out of context. I already said that it was. And y'all are just going to pretend that it wasn't over and over again. It's up, man. If you're not helping these people, and you're not helping them.
I love how she does, she did the meme. She's like there screaming with the hand gestures. I can't say I feel sorry for her. She's empowered and unleashed these fringe elements and extremists within her own party, and they always eat their own. So what do you make of it?
Absolutely. I mean, Raytheon Cortez there has gone from socialist progressive hero to neoliberal sellout in like record time, and it's amazing to watch. I mean, of course you love watching those videos. She's the same person that I don't know the exact words. She tweeted something about, how you have to get in people's faces, and that's the act of democracy is protests. And her own party has been saying this for a very long time. Maxine Waters, you see him at the gasoline station, he calls a crowd. But when it's done to them, and this is not the first time in recent memory this has happened to AOC. She's been appearing at events in her district where obviously she doesn't live and has never lived, and people are showing up to protest various things. So they're going after her because she's obviously weak. She's obviously selling out. She's easily flustered, so it's really entertaining for us to watch. She doesn't know how to handle confrontation. She's someone who's been protected and shielded her entire life. So if someone and coddled her entire life. So if someone does come up and get in her face, she absolutely loses her mind. She doesn't know how to handle it, which is really entertaining and funny, and she runs away. But the Gaza thing is such a huge problem for Democrats. It's such a huge problem for AOC, and especially for Biden. We saw what happened in Michigan with the Muslim vote going for none of the above during a large percentage of the Michigan voters, we assume most of them from the Muslim community, going for none of the above in the Democrat primary. So the Gaza situation is another prickly one for the Democrats, and also another one that I don't think we would be in right now if Trump were president, much like with Ukraine.
I was also so struck by the reaction of her white boyfriend, who looked more scared than she was. He seemed totally uninterested in defending her, but you can't help but notice that stuff, especially when it's happening to the people who want us to notice skin color and all those things. Really quick, before we get to Tucker, I don't know if you saw this memo from some grumpy Biden appointee at the VA named Rima Ann Nelson. She ordered the department to remove all photos of the famous Times Square kiss after World War II ended. I think we have the photo. We might put it up on the screen. Apparently, the photo was removed because it depicts a non-consensual act and is, quote, inconsistent with the VA's no tolerance policy towards sexual harassment and assault. So there's not much to say about this other than how ridiculous it is, but I figured you might have a funny reaction to this lady and just how far we're going, that we're stripping down famous moments in our history and our heritage.
Well, yeah, I mean, my first thought, aside from all the wokeness of the federal government, et cetera, my first thought was we have people on the federal payroll that our taxes pay for who, like, this is how they spend their day. I want to know what this woman who sent this memo out does, like, every day. Like, I want a timesheet because she's got enough time to sit around and be like, you know what? That picture might be a real offensive to someone. Let's concoct a memo. Let's get this taken down. I mean, this is how our government works. I mean, imagine how many tens of thousands of people work for the government that essentially are this person, that they have nothing better to do all day long. But think about how, a picture might offend someone. Think about a memo they can write to try to have inch through some progressive social change. It's absurd, and we're paying these people. It just made me think that the next Republican president needs to get in there and really, I think as Vivek had proposed doing, just start slashing and burning federal jobs. Just start going in and auditing every office and saying, what do you do all day long? Oh, you decided that a picture was racist? Okay, we're getting rid of you. You obviously, your job doesn't really have any meaning. That was my thought when I heard the news of this.
That would put a lot of people out of work, Chadwick Moore. I mean, if you prevent people from identifying racist photos, you're really coming after a large segment of the Washington, D.C. left's voter base. Let me get to the book, Tucker, the memoir, the biography you wrote about him. It's been wildly successful. You and I know him personally. We knew him before the book and everything like that. And so I'm wondering if you can give the audience, just from having known him before, I mean, I'm sure most of the book was new to those who read it, but having known him before and having talked to all the people you did in the book and interviewing him, of course, was there something that surprised you about him that you didn't know before that you think most people wouldn't know about, and something that's fascinating, interesting?
Yeah, I mean, I knew him just from being a guest on the show, but not really as like a dude, as like a person. And but even through that, I knew that there was a lot more to him than met the guy. I knew he was like a deep, interesting guy, and I knew that he was a very literary guy, which I certainly got to see in working on this book and spending time with him. Is his knowledge of and his passion for great literature and great writing, which is was evident on his show. Those monologues were all him, all his writing, and that really kind of shone through. I think it's I really sort of tracked his sort of evolution in this book, his political evolution, how he kind of went from this hippie in college who loved the Grateful Dead to the guy most people knew him from before Fox on CNN, into now after Fox and what he's been up to since then. We were still working on this book when he was taken off the air. And I really just wanted to give, a human insight into who this guy who is, what his world's like, what he's like off camera, as someone who's become, one of the most influential persons in America, and certainly one of the most polarizing, beloved and hated media figures of all time.
Well, and that's what I think is so fascinating. I always try to tell people, there are a lot of people I know from back home who aren't as political as I am, and the way they've turned Tucker into this punching bag or this creature of the right, I guess, in the media, which to me is, and I tell people who aren't as political, I said, look, you may not agree with Tucker's politics. That's fine. That's to be expected. But to me, it would almost be impossible to not like Tucker, the guy. I mean, he's fun to hang around. He's down to earth. He's genuinely one of the nicest people. He'll talk to strangers. There's that famous video of him in Central Park fishing, and the guy comes up to him. And so I'm glad your book was able to kind of depict some of that. Let me ask you about the Russia trip. Obviously, he's done a lot since leaving Fox, and what struck me about that, two things. I think what he did after interviewing Putin, the clip on the subway and then in the grocery store, that was interesting to me, that it shocked and it bothered people in the media more than the Putin interview itself. So your reaction to that, I think I have a sense of what he was trying to do, having produced for him before. But to me, the media totally missed the mark. I mean, they took that as him, praising their authoritarian government. And you saw people saying like, well, of course the subway's clean, like North Korea's subway's clean too. And I think what his point was, no, it's like if Russia is this country, if they're so authoritarian and if they're as poor as they are compared to us, but they can still have clean subways and filled grocery stores, and what's our excuse? What did you make of the content he put out when he was there?
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And as someone, I've been to Russia, and of course, those are some of the things I marveled at too, was the orderliness of Moscow, the cleanliness of the subways. I mean, it also comes from having an almost entirely, completely homogenous population. And it is a very poor country. It's a very miserable country. I mean, I don't think he touched on some things about, it has the lowest life expectancy of any industrialized country, highest rate of abortion, highest rate of single mother households, rampant drug abuse. I mean, it's not a happy place. And yet it's a very orderly society. I mean, on the surface, underneath, there's tons of corruption, obviously. And I think that, the Putin interview, what we learned from that was, here we have, what really annoyed a lot of people is here we have a world leader, Putin, whether you love him or I don't think there's anyone who loves him, whether you hate him or are ambivalent towards him. What we learned from that interview is he's a man who knows a great deal about his country's history and has apparently a lot of respect for the history of his country. He probably knows a lot more about the history of Russia than Joe Biden knows about the history of the United States or any of our leaders know about the history of our own country. So we see a man who thinks he's standing up for his own country and his own historical borders and his own people. And, we can nobody likes the fact of what he's doing and that he invaded Ukraine, obviously. And yet there's a part of us that can say, well, wouldn't it be nice if we had leaders that believed in our country the way that some others do that we're told are evil? Again, not that you're agreeing with the war that we should start invading people. I think everyone on our side is absolutely against such behavior. But that was something interesting to see that really annoyed a lot of people because they weren't expecting to see that side of Putin. And, of course, you could spend, a week interviewing Putin. There's so many things to ask him about. And obviously Tucker couldn't get to everything.
Right.
But it was another thing that people were so upset when the interview was announced, the left especially, Putin puppet. You had these people like, what's his name, Bill something or other, formerly of the Weekly Standard, saying he shouldn't be allowed back into the country. Yeah, Crystal, that guy, yeah. Tucker's former boss, that guy who was saying he shouldn't be allowed back into the country. And then once the interview dropped, they were silent because, they did see that actually Tucker did press him on many issues quite well. And even for 10 minutes, was trying to negotiate with Putin to release that Wall Street Journal reporter who's being held in prison. So the chatter sort of went away after the interview dropped because they couldn't really say he was a Putin puppet after watching it.
Right. It's interesting you say that you've been there too. I had been to Russia also about 6-7 years ago, and really separate of what Tucker did, I had the same reaction. I mean, both with the subways and the grocery store. I mean, one of the most interesting different grocery stores I'd been to in the world was in Russia, and it wasn't exactly in one of their nicest cities either. And look, it's not to say we don't have gourmet grocery stores here either. Obviously we do. But I mean, again, you hear all this stuff about Russia and what type of country it is, but then you go and you see that they do have luxury goods too, and especially now under economic sanctions. So I thought that was fascinating. And about the Putin interview, something that struck me too, where I think a lot of even commentators on the right, people in right-wing media, and criticizing the way that Tucker had given Putin the floor for the first 30 minutes. And the way I looked at that is there have been a lot of people, maybe not a lot, but there have been some journalists who've interviewed Putin over the years, and it's the same thing. So what would Tucker have achieved by trying to press him on all these issues? I mean, the first question being, you murder people and all this stuff. I mean, the audience wouldn't have learned anything. And so do you think that's more because the media chooses and hopes that they can censor Putin and they don't want him to have the type of platform that Tucker gave? Or do you think it's more that they're really just that dumb of an industry and so I guess limited in their thinking that they think that Tucker had to go in there and push and ask, the tough questions, I guess, straight from the get-go?
Well, there's no such thing in the United States as a positive story about Russia. It doesn't exist. And also there's no such thing in Russia as a positive story about the United States. And even, you won't even see like a travel story on Russia. Maybe on PBS you'll see like a documentary on Catherine the Great or something. That's like as close as you'll get. Even in Europe, before the Ukraine invasion, you go to like the BBC or something, there'd be a documentary about here's this town in Siberia that makes their own butter or whatever. You know what I mean? That doesn't exist in the United States. And it's a holdover from the Cold War. So you can't humanize Russia. Like, you just can't do it. It's forbidden in this country. You have these Philistines like the late John McCain, who would say things like Russia's nothing but a gas station with nuclear weapons. Okay, what? Well, Putin proved that wrong. He gave us a 30-minute history on the lecture on the history of Russia going back to the year 800. But it's the largest country in the world, and it's a place that we've completely dehumanized. We're not allowed to learn anything about it. You're not allowed to know anything about Russia, right? That's how it goes. It's a place that has no culture. It's just a gas station with nuclear weapons. And I think that Tucker, as someone, and even working on this book, he actually referenced Russian literature a lot, which I put some into the book, and I was kind of amazed he'd read that stuff. And so I think that he also sort of went into it with that idea of let's just, find out about this country and this man that we're at war with, because, obviously we are at war with them. And it wasn't the same approach that some hack on CNBC or MSNBC or whatever would have taken. And Tucker has his own style anyway for reporting. I mean, he generally in those long sits down lets people speak. He did that on his Fox Nation show, and he certainly did that with Putin. So it's amazing that to criticize the way someone interviews another person when it's simply a different interview style, and it's not the same that a liberal would have taken.
Totally, and I think the point is everybody learned something from that interview, whether you liked it or not, whether you found it, where you found Putin's long-winded tirade boring or not. Tucker did it in a way that was different and interesting, and we actually were able to learn something about him than, let's say, other interviews that have been given with him in the past. Chadwick, sorry, we got to run. Thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Awesome, thank you.
Well, that's about it for us tonight here on The Absolute Truth with Emerald Robinson. We'll see you tomorrow.